So, you want to buy a prison? Most people think owning a prison means buying a building, hiring guards, and locking the gate. That's roughly true, except a prison is the only business on earth where the government delivers your customers to you by force, and then pays you to keep them from leaving. You don't advertise. You don't compete on price at the front door. Your customer doesn't choose you, can't check out, and the worse his life goes, the more likely he is to come back. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how you actually get paid, the one clause that guarantees your revenue even if crime disappears tomorrow, the second economy hidden inside the walls that the state never sees a cent of, and why the smartest operators have made themselves almost impossible to shut down. Let's start with what it costs to get in, because you can't exactly buy a prison off a shelf. Prisons come in 3 sizes, and they're 3 completely different businesses. At the bottom, there's the small operator. You don't build anything. You sign a contract with a county to run a halfway house, a work release center, or a few hundred beds in an existing jail. Entry cost $2 million and a lot of paperwork. In the middle, there's the real move. You build a facility from scratch, 500 to 1,500 beds, for anywhere between $50 and $150 million. And then you lease it back to the state to run. You own the concrete, they fill it. And at the top, there's the version that actually prints money. You don't own one prison. You become Core Civic or GEO Group, the 2 publicly traded giants that between them run most of the private beds in America, pull in over $4 billion a year combined, and for years were structured, and this is real, as real estate investment trusts. Legally, landlords, their tenants just can't leave. But the building was never the hard part. The hard part is the contract. And a contract like that doesn't come from a good sales pitch. It comes from helping write the law that creates the demand in the first place. Through the 2000s, private prison companies sat on the committees of a group that hands ready-made legislation to state lawmakers. One of the bills that came out of that world was Arizona's 2010 immigration law, the one that turned being in the country illegally into something you could be jailed for. The companies that helped shape the demand for beds were, conveniently, the companies that owned the beds. You're not just buying real estate, you're buying the machine that fills it. And once you have the contract, there's a quieter trick. You get to shape who you hold. Private facilities skew toward the young, the healthy, the low security, the cheap ones, and write their contracts to cap what they'll pay when an inmate gets seriously sick, pushing the biggest medical bills back onto the state. The state keeps the expensive cases. You keep the profitable ones. There's a word for this in the industry. It's called cream skimming, and it's the whole difference between a business and a charity. Now, the question that actually matters: where does the money come from? It's not a fee. It's not a fine. It's called the per diem. The state pays you a fixed amount for every inmate, every single day. Depending on the state and the security level, that's roughly $60 to $80 a head per night. That's about what a roadside motel charges for a room. Think about what that actually is. It's a hotel where the government books every room for you, fills them at gunpoint, and the guests stay for years. You're not being paid to rehabilitate anyone. You're being paid by the bed, by the night, exactly like a Marriott, except nobody at this Marriott is allowed to check out early. And here's where it stops being a hotel and starts being something better. A normal hotel eats the cost of an empty room. You don't, because buried in a huge share of these contracts is a clause called the occupancy guarantee, sometimes called a lockup quota. It requires the state to keep your prison filled to 80-90, sometimes 100% of capacity. And if the state fails to send you enough bodies, if crime drops, if a judge gets lenient, if the whole country gets safer, the state has to pay you anyway, for beds sitting empty. One watchdog review of these contracts found that around 2/3 of them carried occupancy guarantees, some demanding a full 100%. Arizona signed deals promising exactly that. So read that back slowly. You have built the only business in America that gets paid more when the country gets more dangerous, and gets paid the same when it doesn't. You are financially rooting against your own society, and the contract protects you either way. And here's the number that makes the whole thing run. It costs the state somewhere around $40,000 a year to hold one person. You've promised to do it cheaper. So every dollar you shave off that inmate, cheaper food, fewer guards, a nurse instead of a doctor, is a dollar you keep. Your profit margin and his living conditions are the same lever, pulled in opposite directions. And the per diem isn't even the whole business, because there's a second economy, one that runs entirely inside the walls, and it isn't paid by the state at all. It's paid by the families. A phone call from a prison runs through one of two companies that between them turned inmate communication into a business worth well over $1 billion a year, built on mothers who will pay whatever it costs to hear a voice. The commissary, the little store where an inmate buys soap, instant noodles, a candy bar, runs on markups a gas station would be ashamed of. Every money transfer a family sends gets skimmed. And when the sentence is finally over, the state doesn't hand the man cash. It hands him a prepaid debit card loaded with his own money, a card that charges him a fee to check the balance, a fee to withdraw, a fee for sitting unused. He pays to access money that was already his. The last transaction of his sentence is one more skim. Then it goes further. Some facilities handed inmates tablets, and for a while that sounded almost kind, until you saw the pricing. A fee per email. A fee per minute to read a book that's free on the outside. A fee per song. And to make sure the tablet gets used, a number of jails did something quietly vicious. They ended free in-person visits and replaced them with paid video calls. The mother who used to sit across a table from her son now pays by the minute to see him on a screen from the parking lot of the same building he's in. The visit didn't get more convenient, it got monetized. Then there's the labor. Some facilities put inmates to work for cents an hour, or in a few states for nothing at all, a carve-out written directly into the 13th Amendment, the one that abolished slavery everywhere in America, except as punishment for a crime. And that workforce isn't just mopping the cafeteria. Over the years, incarcerated hands have stitched garments, answered customer service calls, packed goods, and built the office furniture that government agencies are required by law to buy. A prison is one of the last places in America where you can run a factory floor and pay almost nothing for the labor, legally, because the Constitution left the door open. So the man in the cell isn't just the product. He's the workforce, and his family is the paying customer. You are billing every side of the same human being. And here's the part that ties the whole model together, the part nobody in this business will say out loud. Roughly 2/3 of the people released from an American prison are arrested again within 3 years. In almost any other industry, a customer who leaves and comes back at that rate would be called loyalty. Here, on paper, it's called recidivism, and it is treated as a tragedy. But look at it through the per diem. A prisoner who leaves gets a job and never returns is a bed that just went empty. A prisoner who comes back is a booking that refilled itself. You are not paid to fix anyone. You are paid to hold them, and quietly. The business works best when nothing about them ever changes. There are also operators who took all of this much further and built revenue streams nobody would put in a presentation slide. This isn't a new idea, by the way. In 1983, 3 men in Tennessee, one of them a former state Republican Party chairman, started the first modern private prison company. 2 years later, they were confident enough to make an offer that still sounds insane. They tried to lease the entire Tennessee state prison system. The whole thing. Every prisoner in the state, run for profit by them. It didn't happen, but the fact that they asked tells you how big the ambition was from day one. And when one of the founders described the pitch, he didn't hide it. "You just sell it," he reportedly said, like he was selling cars or real estate or hamburgers. Prisons sold like hamburgers. Then there's the medical side, because in a lot of these facilities, you don't even provide the healthcare yourself. You outsource it to a specialized contractor that promises to treat sick inmates for a flat fee. And a flat fee means the contractor makes more money the less care it gives. One of the largest of these companies was sued so many times over inmates who died waiting for basic treatment that it did something remarkable. It used a legal maneuver, a corporate restructuring, to split itself in two, load all the lawsuits onto one half, and send that half straight into bankruptcy, walking the healthy half away clean. The dead inmates became a liability you could file for Chapter 11. And then there's Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, where two judges, Mark Chiavarella and Michael Conahan, took around $2.8 million from the developer of a private juvenile detention center. In exchange, one of them sat on the bench and shipped children into that facility for almost nothing. A kid who mocked a school principal online. A kid who took loose change from an unlocked car. He handed down detention sentences at a rate that horrified everyone except the people getting paid. Before it was over, thousands of juvenile convictions had to be thrown out and wiped from the record. Chiavarella went to federal prison for 28 years. The papers called it Kids for Cash. That's what the incentive builds, a company that makes money on every child through the door, and the judge who controls the door. On paper, the $2.8 million wasn't a bribe. It was a finder's fee. So why doesn't everyone do this? Because the same thing that makes the business profitable also makes it fragile. And it dies in a few specific ways. First, your customer base can shrink for reasons you don't control. Crime in America has trended down for decades. Sentencing reform is popular on both political sides. A prison built for a war on drugs that's winding down is a hotel in a town everyone's leaving. Some states have gone further and banned the model outright. California passed a law to phase private prisons and private immigration detention out of the state entirely. Others followed. In 2021, a presidential order told the Justice Department to stop renewing its federal contracts. For a normal operator, that's a death sentence. But the smart ones had already found a new customer, one who isn't a criminal at all. Immigration detention. When the federal government needs to hold people crossing the border, it doesn't build, it rents. The private prison industry pivoted hard into immigration facilities, and today a large majority of people in immigration detention are held in privately run beds. New administration, new enforcement priorities, and suddenly your empty prison in the desert is full again, no crime required. You can watch this happen in real time in the stock price. The morning after the 2016 election, when the market decided the new administration would be friendlier to detention, shares of the two big prison companies jumped by double digits in a single day. The country hadn't changed. The forecast for how many people it would lock up had. And then they did the cleverest thing of all. They bought the alternative to themselves. The largest ankle monitor operation in America, the one that straps a GPS tracker onto people released instead of detained, is owned by one of the two big prison companies. Think about what that means. If the country locks people up, you get paid per bed. If the country decides that locking people up is cruel and switches to monitoring them instead, you get paid per ankle. You have hedged against your own abolition. There is no reform that costs you the customer. There's only a reform that moves him from a cell you own to a bracelet you own. Second, the reputational bomb. Your entire revenue depends on a government contract, and a government contract can die in a single news cycle. One riot, one preventable death, one understaffed night that ends in a lawsuit. One Idaho facility ran so violent that inmates nicknamed it Gladiator School. When the Justice Department first moved to phase private prisons out, the stocks collapsed in an afternoon. When the policy reversed, they came roaring back. That's the whole business in one sentence. Guaranteed revenue on paper, sitting on top of a political mood that can change overnight. The threat is never the man in the cell, it's the headline. And third, the trap that catches greedy operators. You cut too deep. Remember, your margin is the gap between the per diem and what you spend. So you shave. Fewer guards, less training, cheaper food, delayed medical care. It works right up until it doesn't, and then it's a death, an investigation, and a settlement that erases 3 years of profit in a week. So let's pull it together and answer the actual question. How much do you make if you do this right? 2 scenarios, real numbers. Option 1, a single facility. You build a 1,000-bed prison for around $100 million. At a $70 per diem, running near full, that's roughly $25 million a year in gross revenue. After staff, insurance, medical, maintenance and debt service on the building, a well-run facility clears a few million a year. Not glamorous, recession-proof, reform Option 2, you go big and become one of the public companies. $2 billion a year in revenue. Thousands of beds across dozens of states, plus the immigration contracts, plus the phone-and-commissary skim on top. For years it was a real estate trust that paid most of its income straight out as dividends, until 2021, when both giants dropped that structure and killed the dividend to throw every spare dollar at their own debt instead. Either way, you can own a piece of this without ever touching a set of keys. You just buy the stock and let the cages work for the shareholders. And there's a third version now, the one with no concrete at all. You skip the building entirely and just run the tracking, the monitors, the check-in apps, the supervision contracts. No riots, no lawsuit over a death in a cell you own. Just a recurring fee attached to a human being who has to prove every single day that he's exactly where he said he'd be. It's the same business with the walls taken down. Time to be honest about what you've actually bought. Every other business on earth wants its customers to succeed, to come back happy, to tell their friends. Yours is the only one where a customer walking out the front door, rebuilding his life, and never returning is officially recorded as a failure. Where the family pays the phone bill, the inmate works the shift, the healthcare is a line item to be minimized, and the government guarantees the booking whether the bed is full or not, or whether there's a bed at all, because the newest version of you doesn't need one. It just needs a signal from an ankle. Not bad for an industry that turns the loss of a person's freedom into a per-night room charge and gets the state to promise the room stays rented, even after it's torn the room down.